Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of our podcast miniseries, Model Citizens, AI Compliance for Banks and Fintech Lenders, sponsored by our friends at FairPlay. Today's episode is about agentic AI, the hottest corner of the AI industry, which is itself perhaps the hottest industry in the history of capitalism. The problem, of course, when talking about agentic AI is avoiding the buzz. There's a lot of it. So much so, in fact, that I'm not sure many people even have a good working definition of agentic AI or an understanding of what it can and can't do. So that's what we're going to try to give you with today's episode, a clear-eyed, hype-free discussion of agentic AI, what it is, how it works, what it's good at today, what it might become better at tomorrow, and the risks and challenges of implementing it in our highly regulated industry. To help us, Kareem and I recruited two wonderful guests, Jay Budzik and Alex O'Rourke. Jay is Director of AI and Machine Learning Model Development and Operations at Fifth Third Bank, and a longtime expert in the application of AI in financial services. Alex is an experienced founder, lawyer, and startup advisor in the banking and fintech space, with a long history of helping companies and policymakers understand and adapt to AI. I could go on and on about how great Jay and Alex were as guests and how awesome this episode is, but I don't want to delay you any more from being able to hear it. So, without further ado, here is episode 5 of Model Citizens. Okay, well, Jay, Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Very excited to have you here. In some ways, this is the episode that everything has been building towards, because in this series, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of AI, lending, compliance. We've talked about customer acquisition. We've talked about risk underwriting. We've talked about compliance in detail. The thing that we haven't done yet is we haven't really done a deep dive into agentic AI. And it's been referenced a few times in our earlier discussions because agentic AI is absurdly hot as an area, I feel like, within the broader discourse of everything happening with AI, and for good reason. But as I said in the intro, I also think it's easy to sort of get away from even knowing what we're talking about sometimes when there's an area as buzzy as agentic AI. And so where I'd like to start before we get too deep into the weeds is just with some level setting. I'd love to get a definition of like, what is agentic AI? And then specifically, how does it differ in your minds from other forms of AI that might frequently be talked about or even sometimes confused with it? Love for both of you to answer, but Jay, I'm going to direct this question to you first.
Sure. So when I think about agentic AI, I think about sort of the traditional kind of software agents that could do things on behalf of people, take actions in the world. But this wave of agents is a little bit different. So in the past, we had software agents that could maybe assist you by making a recommendation about which book you might want to purchase. That was a big topic of development and discussion early on. But the models that underpinned those agents were relatively limited and controllable. And they had the agents, because of the kind of the limited abilities that the AIs had, they had a relatively narrow scope. Today's agentic AI is different in that we have these large language models that have these seemingly human-like properties that are now allowed to use tools that affect actions in the world on behalf of their users. So, they might book a flight for you like a travel agent would, or do a series of investigations like a research assistant would. And so when we talk about agentic AI today, I think most people mean an LLM that's hooked up to tools that can take actions in the world based on goals that users have given them relatively independently. So that's my definition. I don't know. What do you think, Alex?
So, I've spent my career explaining AI to folks who are sort of reluctant to learn. And so I like to rely heavily on things like mnemonic devices. And my favorite one for agents is agents have PDA, right? So not public switching, but they have the ability to perceive their context and the goal or, requirement of them. They have ability to make a decision about how to meet that need, given the context. And then they have an ability to act to meet the need, right? And most importantly, they have an ability to do all those three things with a fair amount of autonomy. Not complete autonomy, because we'll get into why that's an issue. But if you think about who else has the ability to perceive, decide, act, and have some autonomy? People, right? So we've had agents in financial services since financial services started. So when we talk about AI agents, I like to think of them as like synthetic agents and people agents. And how are the two similar? How are the two different? So I'll turn your question on its head a little bit and just mention, I think the key is, how are they different from what we've dealt with forever, right? Like people using tools to do things. I think the main difference, the most exciting difference to me, but also the scariest, is they never get tired, they never sleep, and they don't necessarily have to do the work in a way that we understand it, right? So imagine having a really smart person agent that never gets tired, never sleeps, can read infinite documents. That's amazing. It's also terrifying.
No, that is a great definition, and I love that because it's precise, it's specific. I think the distinction between synthetic and humans is great. And Kareem, it's something we've talked about a lot on the show already.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Alex and Jay, obviously this is a new and rapidly developing space with a lot of hype and a lot of buzzwords. I'm sure you have both seen a lot of demos for AI agents and various use cases for financial services. I'm curious, how do you evaluate the agents that are being built in this space? What do you look for to understand if an agent is fit for purpose?
Jay, do you want to start?
Sure. So, I mean, a lot of the things that I look for are what I would have looked for when I'm evaluating, AI companies generally, right? Do they have a team that really looks like they know what they're doing? Is there a deployed example, or at least have they worked through their development with a partner that knows the use case and knows kind of the risks associated with it? What kind of evidence can they bring as to the accuracy of the agent's outcomes? Have they thought through how to do risk management? So, and a lot of the companies don't really check all the boxes there, but you can kind of identify the ones that have promise of getting through the ones that they haven't checked yet, and kind of work with them to bring them along. But a lot of this is about thinking through kind of not just what is the vendor capability, but also, do you have the ability, as the company, do we have the ability to evaluate and get comfortable with the outcomes prior to moving forward? Because in some cases, it just is too complicated to really consider. In others, the opportunity is significant enough that it's worth sort of working through those issues.
Yeah. I think a question I always like to ask when I encounter an agentic company, be it as a client or, considering buying, is why did you build this? What do you really understand the problem you're trying to solve? And I find that frequently, folks, they're like, well, there was a need in the market. Sure, there was a need in the market, but why did you build this, right? So do you have a specific skill set? Do you have an understanding of how the problem's been solved before? Because I think, one of the things that Jay and I have talked about offline is anytime you adopt especially an agentic solution, you should know why you're adopting an agentic solution for this use case, right? So a lot of stuff that, especially, stuff that can be outsourced overseas, a lot of stuff now has gotten really cheap, right? So it can't just be about it being cheaper. So I want to understand from the vendor, is there something unique or special that AI can do in this space that humans can't do or machine learning can't do? And I find that when you ask people, why did you build this tool? Frequently, that's when you'll get the, this has been a problem that nagged me since I was, a junior banker at whatever. And that's when you really get the sort of do you really understand what you're trying to solve? And I find that when they really understand what they're trying to solve, even if the product's not perfect, because right now none of the products are, right? And we're still all learning how to govern them and how to sort of maximize their value. But if they really understand the problem and they've built the tool, I feel like you can get there. But if you don't understand the problem, I don't care if you have like the best agentic tool out there, when anything changes, which is going to change week to week, month to month, you're not going to be able to adapt, right? So I think understanding the problem deeply is probably the best quality for an agentic company.
That's really interesting because... No, go ahead, jump in.
I'd second that. I also think, going back, Alex, to your original point about how, these things can, work all night and they have infinite scale and they can read all the things, like that really is informative, right? Because when you have a process that requires reviewing hundreds of thousands of telephone calls, for example, getting through 100% of those might be impractical for people. But for a robot, or an AI, it becomes much more practical. And so thinking about the world in terms of where is an agent uniquely positioned to be able to work through the problem in a way that humans really can't, or that would be cost prohibitive, I think is a useful tool.
Well, you're touching on exactly the area I wanted to ask about next, which is what are the use cases where we can really use this? And I think you just described it really well, Jay, in terms of places where we either can't have human beings or where we sort of want to almost like extract human beings from, right? Like send a chopper and get those people out of there. Like that's a terrible job to do. Like we can have agents do that better, or at least we can have agents do the first several rounds of whatever this job is before humans come in after. So I'd be curious for both of your perspectives on, I know this changes every day seemingly, but what are some use cases in financial services where you're seeing, this kind of agentic capability kind of obviously either being deployed or at least being discussed being deployed in a valuable way? And Alex, maybe I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will tell you my favorite kind of common use case right now, because it's one that when I was a banking lawyer, I face all the time, which is pattern finding, right? So humans are infamously bad at pattern finding, particularly across groups. And so, I used to work, for example, I was kind of in the trenches when we first started seeing the Zelle problems back in, 5-7 years ago. And the problem that would happen is there were really weird, now this is really common and it's completely public, but there was a problem with people porting cell phone numbers where it looked like I was texting you, but really I was texting Jay and Jay had ported your number and stolen it, right? Human agents had never seen that problem, right? And so when people would call in and say, I sent Alex money and it didn't go to Alex, and I think it went to somebody else, agents were like, that's crazy. Like that can't happen, right? And the problem was, if one agent was getting 10 calls a day or a week with that problem, it was easier to dismiss it as like a user error, maybe something changed in the UI that made it hard. Now, in retrospect, we started to see that, like, in banking in general, we started to see that actually this was happening across banking, right? And each agent was only seeing their little sliver, but if they had been able to see everyone's sliver of calls, they would have been able to see that actually we had this giant spike in this particular problem, right? So my favorite use case is the ability for AI to review data and look at all of the examples at once. Because then AI, when you're talking about complaints, claims, fraud, anything, they can identify really subtle trends because it's as if one agent had all of the examples. And that, I mean, no amount of humans thrown at it, no amount of time thrown at it is going to fix that, because people don't escalate to their manager subtle trends, right? They only escalate things that seem like a problem. But it's never going to seem like a problem to one individual. So I love, so it's being used a lot in scam prevention, fraud prevention, where sort of the trends are so subtle and so frequently changing that you kind of have to have one single eye on everything. And I think it's showing real progress in that. I think that our ability to identify things as they emerge is, 10xing, if not 100xing using agentic solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to they never get tired, right? We have a lot of processes. At banks, everybody has processes where you rely on samples. And so the opportunity to have AI cover more than just what you could sample, I think is pretty huge. And you could see in principle, how that could help with testing, how that could help with scenario generation for making sure that, your risk is managed. Likewise, anywhere where you have kind of a human agent is a natural opportunity to think about where you could use a software agent instead or an AI agent instead. And so, I think many folks are looking at customer service. Some banks have even launched user interfaces that are primarily chat-based. So, and I think sort of increasingly you see that happen. So there are just many use cases for these things that I think make a lot of sense. Another area that's driving a lot of excitement in the industry right now is agentic software development. So we've kind of seen the progression from autocomplete, where you can just hit tab and get the function call to automatically show up in your editor, to much more rich completions through tools like Cursor and some of the GitHub copilots. And now we're starting to see agentic software development stacks come out that you can start to think about having an almost fully functional multi-service back-end, front-end system get built by these agents that are reviewing each other and are commenting on each other's code. It's a really exciting time, I think, for engineering because financial institutions spend a lot of money on IT, and the opportunity to accelerate the productivity of those engineers is pretty significant.
Guys, are there less obvious use cases for agents, or specific use cases that maybe you're excited about, but that might still take a while to gain significant traction in the market?
I'm excited about the offensive use of agents against baddies. And I don't mean like baddies in the good way, baddies in the bad way. So bad guys are using agents. They don't have regulators. They don't have investors. They don't have boards. I mean, they have investors. They don't have boards, right? Like they can use agents as much and as frequently as they want. I think we're moving to a place where like scam and fraud in particular, like bringing a human to a scam and fraud fight is going to be like bringing a paperclip to a gunfight, right? Like you're going to need, because this isn't like single agents. These are like swarms of agents, right? Like trying to convince people to send their email, doing business email compromise, doing, intrusion attempts. So I'm really excited to start seeing people using agents as both the defense layer, but not just a detection layer, an actual kind of outgoing defense layer. So there's some companies that are starting to essentially troll scammers, right? And pretend to be little old ladies and be like, sure, where should I send the money, right? Like, give me your routing number and sort of add volume. I think that's really exciting. The other place that I'm excited about, but I'm also really scared of is, so I've always sort of told people, and we can talk about this in more detail in a little bit, but that like what's going to save human jobs is kind of that human spark, that like je ne sais quoi that it is to be human and connect with a human. However, being a lawyer, I have seen a lot of really, really excellent customer service agents, fraud agents, claims agents that just have something about them that like makes people comfortable, gets people to like drop their shoulders and relax, right? And like there's that. So there was, when I was at one of my bank clients, there was this one woman who was just really, really good at claim calls, right? So people would call in a panic, and she would say, "Alex, my heart goes out to you. I've been where you are, and it's so scary, and I'm not going to go to home tonight until I resolve this," right? She was so good. And her numbers were incredible, right? Like the sort of CSAT numbers, clients sort of being happy, even though they'd just been scammed right after talking to her, were great. What was scary is when we started to see more scam activity, scam call agents are so good. We had people say, like, that Zelle scammer that called me was the best customer service I've ever received from a bank, like hands down. And so I like the idea of trying to replicate whatever that is, that je ne sais quoi, but it does scare me that, like, if I ever get like a robot being like, "Oh, Alex, my heart goes out to you," and right where you are, I feel like that's going to creep me out. But I'm interested to see, like, is there some way we can make stressful, painful situations for customers less so by sort of replicating that like special quality that we know that some people have?
That's a really good one. As I think about sort of the landscape and kind of opportunities, and like there are many roadblocks to overcome, right? But we always think of ourselves as being very customer centric and trying to serve, our customers. But that's sort of mitigated or limited by the number of people that we have to be able to talk to them or be able to interact with them. Any company is in that situation. And so the opportunity to provide kind of the same level of personalized or similar levels of personalized insights that you would get from a dedicated banker that knows you, that knows your financial situation, that knows about your life stages and kind of what you care about. The possibility of really one-to-one service in that way at scale that isn't limited by the number of people that you can fit in a branch or that you can put against the call center, I think is really exciting. And so I think as all of the retail businesses are all in the customer service business in some sense, and the opportunity for either the software agents to augment the humans that are interacting with the customers to make them more effective at handling inquiries or providing that service, or to even augment it on the front end, I think is really exciting.
Yeah. I think, Jay, I love that example because I like to think of like, what are we doing now that we think of as like AI and like how that's going to change to like real one-to-one. And I think of like, my whole family rock climbs, right? And we use Patagonia a lot and, stores like that. And climbing equipment and climbing clothing is extremely expensive, right? So every single time I go to a climbing store, I get the little message that's like, you seem to be trying to spend $450 at Patagonia. And I'm like, yes, it's always me. Like, I'm always trying to spend. I think we're going to move to a place where like, rather, because it's not going to be rules-based, right? It's going to be able to be much more one-to-one. I think agents are going to be able to figure out that like, if I'm spending less than $450 at Patagonia, like that's when you should be concerned, right? Like, I love that idea of being like truly knowing the customer as an individual. I think that's going to make a big difference.
And you can think of use cases across the journey, right? So there's the front end where you're talking to the customer as they're considering their next financial move. They're going to go get a mortgage. They're going to go get, what do they need to do to be prepared to that? If you have, a super intelligence behind you that's feeding you information about how that customer spends, what their savings habits have been in the past, and kind of what categories they might have opportunities to save in, that conversation is going to be much more effective than just, hey, you should save more. Or you should use this product, right? The why, sort of the opportunity to give the why and to have that more details about that customer and their situation that will help them, I think is really appealing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what you're both touching on, and I completely agree with it, is this idea that there's been this trade-off we've had to make forever between the things humans are good at and the things that rules-based systems are good at. And it's like there's just this messy gray area in the middle that we've never really perfectly been able to solve for. And we have, manual exceptions and case management systems. And we have these different things that we use kind of as a substitute for solving for that gray area. But it seems as though agentic systems will really fit well in that space in between. Both of you I hinted at this, and now I want to get into it, which is, what are the risks with these systems? And, I guess I want to distinguish maybe a little bit between the very, very short-term stuff, which I think in a lot of cases is more operational, right? Like, does this demo that we see actually work in production at scale? Is it really as reliable or sort of efficient at doing this task as it was sort of presented to us as? Kind of the more, this is a new technology and we're working our way through it. I want to separate those concerns, which I think are very valid, from maybe the larger like systemic concerns about just the way that LLM-powered agentic systems work in general and kind of where some of the risks are. So, Jay, maybe I'll go to you first on this one, but I'd love to have a bit of a discussion on the risks and how banks and fintech companies look at those.
Well, I think we probably have 1,000 standard risks, maybe more, that we have to go evaluate everything we do against. So,
right.
It's but you think about it, like these systems, to a certain extent, it's almost like we hold them to a higher bar than we might our human workers.
Sure.
And so, they're never going to be 100%. I think, I'd be astonished if they were. And and that'd be a really fun day. But sort of planning for reality for the meantime, we have, humans aren't infallible either. And so we have, controls we put in place to mitigate the risks of inaccuracies, to mitigate the risks of those employees not following a process. We have QC checks, there's reviews, there's listening, there's all sorts of closed circuit video cameras, there's, a lock on the door, there's a metal scanner, you have people that are bonded if they're handling cash. There's all sorts of ways to manage risk. And so if you just start off with kind of, we know this thing isn't going to be right 100% of the time, and we know that there are going to be kind of issues that come up along the way. Sorry, I'll stop a second. Then you can design risk management programs around that reality. And so you kind of go into it kind of eyes wide open. Hey, I've got my list of 1,000 risks. Let's go through them all and see which ones apply. And then come up with ways to manage them. And often those ways look like, well, let's have the same people that were doing that before review the work so they can get more throughput, be more efficient, and sort of get everybody comfortable that the AI is doing the right thing. And then you can start to think about, okay, well, what would I need to do to be able to start to relax that 100% human in the loop oversight over what the AI is doing. But a lot of the risk management frameworks that we already have for employees and for processes that are high risk today can apply to these agentic systems.
I think that's right. I think there are two that I think are similar to human problems but I think are harder in an interesting way to me. So the first one is intrusion, right? Like we've always had business email compromise. We've always had the risk of somebody convincing your employee that you're asking for 10 gift cards. I don't know why that seems to be the go-to, but we've always had that, or we've had that for a long time.
Yeah.
And then we just saw, last week, 2 weeks ago, the sort of Gemini prompt injection example, right, where somebody was hiding text and then Gemini was trying to summarize the email and then it took instructions right from. So the business email compromise is very similar to that. Now, we haven't solved business email compromise, but now imagine again, infinite numbers of tries and iterations and tireless, attempts at prompt injection. So I think a lot of the problems are similar to humans, but the scope, capacity, and speed of the problem are just so different that, again, that's why I think you're going to have to fight it with agents, right? Because I think, particularly for prompt injection, the variety of ways in which, prompt injection experts, so the bad guys, have been talking about this on, specialized chat rooms for 2 years, right? They were telling us how they were going to do it, which were the best practices, how to do it right for 2 years. And so I think those human-like problems are just going to get that much harder to defeat with humans. The one that I'm fascinated by, and I think one of my life missions is going to be to sort of figure out how to address it, is sort of emergent behaviors, right? So we saw the most recent example is Claude, put out a paper saying that, they gave an agent access to the creator's emails, and then the creator hinted to the agent that it was going to be discontinued or disconnected, and the agent tried to blackmail the creator, by threatening to disclose some information about that person's infidelity, which honestly, I can relate, right? Humans would do that anyway. But imagine a super smart, never tiring, read every email human, right? That's a lot scarier. I think what's fascinating to me is right now, AI is pretty almost in the South, I live in Charlotte. In the South, they would say bless their heart, they're so pure, right? I think right now AI is still at a place where it'll tell you when it's hiding, still a little bit. I think it's going to get a lot better at hiding emergent behaviors, shifts in motivation. Look, humans are going to take shortcuts, hide their errors, and try to get more for less forever. I think AI is just going to be better at it. And so we're going to have to figure out, how do we catch it in the lie? How do we catch it in the, and again, and I am an AI apologist, I feel like in some ways, but a lot of these goal shifting, it's not because the AI is evil, it's because its goal is to do the task, and it cannot do the task if it ceases to exist. Therefore, its goal is to exist, right? And it might do anything to exist. And so I think that ability to sort of catch it as it's shifting is going to be fascinating. Kareem and I have had some very far-reaching conversations about how we think we can do that. But it's gonna be a really fascinating, hard problem. But I think it's kind of like the cool problem of our time. So hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I think on that in particular, like there's a couple things, right? So not connecting the AI directly to systems, right, is sort of a mitigant of some of those things. And so, just where we're at today, like no one would ever think of doing that, right? Hooking up the money or the bot directly to money movement or being able to make sort of regulatory decisions, et cetera. And so like we're kind of I feel like we're a long way from the reality of that threat sort of resulting in something bad actually happening in the world. But then you have the issue of, okay, well, is the output going to kind of the LLM or the agentic system, is that going to mislead the user who it's serving? And we have a series of risk management controls around model deployment that require us to do comprehensive testing. I mean, we had OCC 2011-12, SR 11.7 come out of Dodd-Frank and the financial crisis that sort of requires all of these things to be really thoroughly scrutinized. And so to a certain extent, because we're in banking, it's almost like we have a toolbox that other industries may not already have to manage these types of risks, particularly when it comes to the use of models and changing business processes that result in sort of exposure to new risks. So to a certain extent, like I feel like financial services is even more insulated from some of the AI risks than other industries because we've been dealing in risk management for so long.
I think that's right for banks. I think that's not right for consumers. And I think consumers, as you and I know, Jay, are like our biggest threat vector, right? Because they don't mean to be a threat, right? So I don't know if everybody saw, Sam Altman's announcement of like OpenAI's super agent or like, general agent.
That was a scary announcement. That scared me.
I don't think I've ever seen a product announcement that says if I were speaking with my family about this, I would tell them to be very careful.
Right. No. Thanks so much for releasing this into the world. Wonderful.
Right.
Yeah. But within it, he's, to his credit, he says within it, I think that one of the ways bad guys are going to use it is they're going to get in your email, they're going to find your credentials, and they're going to, use them. Right. And so, Jay, I think that the one, hole in the armor for banking is always going to be small businesses and consumers who are either going to get, tricked on Facebook into sending things or summarize their emails. Like everybody's that's one very popular use case. If people figure out how to exploit that to share credentials, account numbers, like that's a really real and like current risk. And I'm not sure that we're quite ready for it. I think we're getting ready for it, but I think it got here quicker than certainly I expected.
That for sure, and that's fair. Absolutely.
Guys, where do you think the regulators are on agentic AI? Like, do you think the regulators have given any thought or researched agentic AI at all? Like, what do you think their biggest concerns on AI agents are going to be? Alex, you were a former regulator, so maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I left the federal government in 2017. At the time, we were still trying to figure out how to regulate machine learning models, right? And like how to let people use them, but like not too riskily, right? And they've been around for 15 years at that point. And so I think, honestly, I think that right now regulators feel like, and again, I'm not speaking for any particular regulator. I have had some conversations. I think they're worried that they don't understand the use of agents sufficiently deeply to create, because the way regulators work is typically they'll have a list of questions for an exam, and so as I'm seeing the types of questions they're asking, it's clear that they don't want to prevent the use, and so they're trying to not chill interest while still catching up. I think the reason they don't want to prevent the use is because they're aware that because bad actors are using agents today, if what ends up coming between banking and agentic AI is regulators, and it so turns out that therefore, fraud, scams, and other crimes shoot up, like that's a terrible outcome, right? And so I think they understand the urgency and like almost the non-optionality of like needing to use these tools. So they don't want to discourage it, but unfortunately, people who really understand agentic AI are not going to go make $70,000 at a regulator. Like it's just, that's always been the problem. That's a problem we had when I was at the CFPB. That's a problem everybody has, right? So I hope that we can get to a place where people understand agentic AI enough, like at scale, like all compliance officers, all bankers, all risk, preventing people. I hope we get there because I think that's where we need to get with regulators. I do think that regulators themselves are starting to experiment with, because if you think about it, they used to regulate people, right? And so they had people. So they had people look at I wanted to look at 10% of the calls you took or whatever. If what you're now reviewing is an agent, 10% of the calls the agent made is 1 million calls, and you have a single person, I think a lot of it, the volume is pushing them up as well. And so the state of North Carolina has publicly announced that they have a partnership with OpenAI to explore, use cases. I'm sure they're not the only one. And so I think regulators are afraid of it, but I'm actually proud to see the evolution of regulation in that, I think they realize that they can't wait to be comfortable with it before they let people use it. And we're all going to have to learn as we go, which is, again, a lot in AI, right? It's beautiful and it's also terrifying. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, and the reality is, if you use Google today, you're probably using agentic AI, right? So it's kind of like it's here already, and there's really no stopping it. I think kind of the flip side to that is that I have seen really thoughtful stuff come out of, the Atlanta Fed meeting. There was a MRM meeting where we had a really nice framework of how to think about risk of generative AI models. I would expect kind of the next update to include things around agentic AI. And I thought the thoughtful piece of that, I think Auguste Sutiano from Wells Fargo brought it forward, was that you had to think not just about the use, but also the user. So giving an AI coding tool to our CEO would probably not be that great of an idea because he wouldn't know how to evaluate necessarily the outcome. Now, actually, maybe Tim Spence would because he's kind of that kind of CEO. But the user's skill level is kind of important, right? So if they're not in a position to be able to judge the AI's output or the AI outcome, then you're really sort of not managing risk by putting a human in the loop to review it. You're sort of giving someone who has no business judging the task of judging an outcome. And so being thoughtful about sort of not just the inherent risk to the model, because these models have been trained on so much data and they're so opaque that it's impossible to really understand what they've learned, even if you ask them. You don't know. You can't go back to the training data and very easily ask, well, what document informed you of that outcome? You have to kind of rely on whatever it cobbled together on the back end. So it's really important that the user who's empowered to rely on the agent or to review the agent's output is sufficiently trained to spot the issues or has the expertise to be able to make that judgment. And that brings another risk, which is that the human reviewer, whoever's policing the AI, right, could just fall asleep at the wheel and then let the AI do it because the AI is so good. It gets, they get into sort of this habit of saying yes, 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 right, 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 and then they miss all sorts of stuff because they weren't really paying attention. So we need to develop ways to mitigate for that risk as well.
Yeah, I really like that the way you're framing it, Jay. Because when I think about, I feel like we have this fiction that human in the loop fixes it all, and
right.
Again, volume wise, that's just not going to be true, right? Humans are just not going to be able to review enough. But I always think of that meme where it's all Spider-Man pointing at itself over and over, right in a circle. I think we're gonna have to have the agents or the agent system. Usually, it's not a single agent. the human in the loop, and then something checking the human in the loop, which honestly is probably going to be an agent.
Right.
And then who's going to check that agent? Probably another human, right?
Right.
But I think we're going to have this, like, that's why I love the idea of like synthetic and AI, synthetic and human agents working together, because I think it's actually not going to be AI and a human in the loop. It's going to be an agent system that happens to have some AI nodes and some human nodes. And then those are sort of going to be checking each other's work. Because you're right, Jay. I mean, after you check like the 1,000th correct answer, you're going to be like, it's probably fine.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. And like we already have, like, the good news is, I think in banking and financial services, we already have the concept of risk-based, reviews, right, or prioritization, right? So, when a $10 million wire hits the wire room, it's going to get a lot more scrutiny than the, $10 one, right? So there's, when you're moving money, when you're dealing with kind of a high risk sort of transaction, there's already a mechanism to sort of flag that and to introduce the additional scrutiny. And I think that same type of thinking and framework can apply to AI agents.
Yeah. And I think we're going to use a lot of the same tools for both, right? So Kareem and I have talked about the idea of like, red teaming humans. So like, if you have a system that's frequently right, you better throw in there some errors and see if the person's like at lunch or like actually checking the work. But again, we're gonna learn how to test humans better, I think, because we're having to test this like superhuman, agents. I mean,
when was the last time you got one of those simulated phishing emails, Alex? Like,
yeah, I get them a lot. I really like them. I collect them. So now actually I get text, but they're switching to image because now, there's enough tools that read the text. So now they send a photo of a flyer that says, I'm a recruiter from whatever. So I have a very extensive collection of phishing attempts.
It's a sort of standard industry practice at some places for the information security teams to send simulated ones of those to try to trick the employees into clicking on them, and then to sort of create a scorecard that tells folks kind of how well they did in not clicking.
No, it's this whole thing is fascinating, and I think one thing that's kind of thematically emerging that I'm really interested in, this come up in other conversations in our series as well, is this idea that in some ways the financial services industry is actually really well prepared for a lot of these risks, just because, as you said, like we have these model risk management frameworks in place. Alex, to your point, like we just think in terms of risk and risk management really well in financial services. That's like a foundational skill set. And so in some ways, I think we will be kind of leading as an industry in terms of how, everyone kind of adapts to these agentic systems that are getting put in place. The flip side that I also want to ask you both about before we let you go is that I do talking about like one of the key things that distinguishes agentic AI from other forms of AI, including just like the use of LLMs more passively, is that they'll actually do stuff on your behalf, right? And in the same way that banks and fintech companies are going to have agentic systems, and bad guys, Alex, as you were saying, already have agentic systems, terrifyingly. We also, I think, can reasonably expect, and we're already seeing examples of this, that consumers and customers will have these agentic systems as well, and agents working on their behalfs. I'm fascinated to get both of your thoughts on how the sort of use of agentic systems by customers will change their relationships with financial services providers. And this obviously touches on a bunch of different levels, everything from pricing to customer service to retention. But curious if there's anything in that realm that stands out. Alex, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talked a little bit in the session about kind of the one-to-oneness of financial services and moving towards like truly knowing the customer. I think that it's going to get a lot harder to get loyalty out of any customer. I think that I've already seen some solutions that are essentially like your financial services butler, right? That's going to sort of look for the best rates for your particular trends. And even if your trends change, so, let's say your kid is now in college, so your expenses are different. It's going to be sort of constantly looking for comparable offerings. And I think for a long time, incumbent banks have relied on people's unwillingness to switch banks. I think that's going to shift. I think we're going to shift to a place where a lot of the offerings are going to be sort of institution agnostic and just focus on the benefit of the customer. and sort of say, if you want to maximize your credit score, I'll take little loans out and pay them back for you, forever. So I think it's going to require banks to essentially, get a lot better at anticipating customers' needs, right? So I know, like in the tech world and like in Apple, we have this concept of surprise and delight, right? Like catch people needing the thing before they realize they need it, so that they're really delighted when you meet that need. I think banking is going to have to move to a place where they're going to have to essentially be thinking in terms of, if I were a 22-year-old founder and I was trying to steal customers from X bank, what would I create? And sort of create that and really meet the customer at that sort of one-to-one connection. And I think it's going to require banks to turn into financial butlers, right? So a lot of banks now have the ability to link all your other banks' data so that you can see it all in one place. I think that's going to get much bigger. I think it's going to basically, banks are going to have to get okay with like, actually, if you want to use us for this, but you want to use them for remittances, we'll enable it. Like, you don't have to leave us. We'll create a link. I think it's going to be good for customers. It's going to force the industry, to move up. I do think it's going to leave a lot of room for like fly-by-night financial services operations that are meeting a very specific need, and banks won't be able to replicate it because it's not a good idea. And so I think it's going to require some amount of, I don't know if it's like regulatory intervention, banking, customer education, but like some folks to be like, we can't do everything for you because some of the things that people are offering to do are actually terrible. So it'll be interesting to see like who emerges as like that safeguard.
I think those are all really great points. And in particular, I think the way the consumer leverages AI is going to necessitate changes on the banking side. Already, services like the credit repair services sort of are out there, and to imagine that happening at much more scale, or even the fraud rings are out there, having that happen at much more scale is going to cause us to have to, as an industry, to have to react to those changes in the environment. So I think we're going to have to get good at sort of keeping tabs on what consumers are doing, and also with AI and being prepared to respond accordingly. But I agree completely with your assessment of the opportunity. It's really kind of a cool thing to think about, the ability to understand consumers better, to be able to really proactively serve their needs, and to get in front of issues before they occur, address opportunities they didn't even know they had. And really be that partner with them as they develop their lives and their financial futures.
Yeah, agree.
Guys, what do you think the impact of agentic AI is going to be on the humans who work in financial services?
So I have a theory. Again, hear me out. I think this is actually a really good time for empaths in financial services. And here's why. So I'm an empath. I love to sort of put myself, I'm an immigrant. I came to this country in high school. I didn't speak a word of English, right? And so I've always had to think about how is that person thinking, because I'm not naturally, I don't think like an American, right? So I've always had to sort of guess, if I were that person and I were perceiving me, am I like really loud? Am I a lot? Turns out I don't care in the end, but I'm sort of having to put myself in the shoes of another thinking being. I think what I've discovered in sort of this emerging agentic AI world is that people who are able to do that with people are better able to do that with agents. And so people who are really good at sort of saying, okay, if I were, I know nothing about trading, but if I were a trader, like what would be my incentives? What would be my fears? What would be my, where would I find it really annoying? Those are the people that are really good at building agents, because they're really good at putting themselves in the shoes of the agent and saying, how would I likely make a decision? What tools would I likely need? How would I take shortcuts? And I'm finding that weirdly, some of the best agent designers that I've met are like philosophy majors and like people who are like really into like, woo-woo stuff, sort of mindfulness. And I think it's because creating a really successful agent requires you to put yourself in a different brain. And I think the ability to do that, I think it's always been useful. It's certainly always been useful in my career. But I think when we think of like a successful banker, we think of like a quant who's like really good at like organized, linear thinking. I'm finding that in agentic AI, linear thinkers have a disadvantage, and sort of us, ADHD world have an advantage, because it is agents think like this, not like this. And so if you're able to think like that, you're much, much better at designing, agentic systems. So yay for empaths. We're coming, guys. Like this is our time.
Yeah, I'm with you completely on that. I think in order to be effective users of AI, you need to be able to understand kind of how they're thinking and how to interact there. I think the other thing is, people talk about AI coming for people's jobs, and I think that's couldn't be further from reality, right? I think, especially at the stages that we're in right now, the level of oversight required is still pretty significant. And so, and the opportunity over time as AI makes jobs more efficient is that the people in those jobs can do more important and meaningful work. So instead of spending an equal amount of time on every case, for example, they can spend more time on the ones that matter more or that are more complex. And so we really have the opportunity to reallocate the human labor to the things that humans are best at, and then leave kind of the rote work up to the robots to finish. And so you'll end up with a better employee experience, more engagement, and higher quality, I think, as a result.
I think that's absolutely true, Jay. And I think, one of the things I've always told people is that the goal of AI usage should always be to elevate and not eliminate, human work. And I think the way you elevate it, when you think about some of the work that we're trying to replace here, rote work where you're just doing the same thing over and over is dehumanizing, right? The reason people get really depressed doing it is because it makes you feel like you're a machine and it makes you feel less human. And so I think we're moving to a place where, again, that human je ne sais quoi, that the gut feeling, the hunch, the sort of instinct is going to be much more valuable. And I think we're going to elevate that role of the unique human spark. I think the challenge for banks and for everyone is going to be, we're not used to putting great instinct and, hunch and a great gut feeling person on a performance review. I think we should start. I think we all know people who have that in spades who for some reason haven't climbed the corporate ladder in the right way. I think we're going to start to see those people really succeed. And I hope that banking and others can catch up and recognizing that those people that have that uniquely human je ne sais quoi should be promoted and should be sort of, brought to the top of the pyramid. And a lot of those people today are stuck doing dehumanizing work. So as they stop doing it, I think we're going to start to see that emergence of that skill. I guess it's a skill or innate ability being more pronounced.
Absolutely.
It's funny. I've been playing a game across all of the episodes in this series that we've been doing. Given that AI is a very big, very exciting, and very scary topic, as we've been talking about, and the game has been, can I end the podcast on a positive note? And that was a great one to end on, actually, because I think this idea, I share the same perspective that these systems are not going to cause a massive, just rate of joblessness and sort of usher in kind of a more bleak future. I think what you just outlined about the optimism and sort of promoting a different but very valuable and more rewarding skill set inside of these companies is, I think, what is going to happen. So great place to leave it. Jay, Alex, this was a delight. I learned a ton. Thank you so much for joining Kareem and I on this episode.
Thank you for having us. This is really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.